I don't really know how to contextualize this video other than just a cathartic discussion about the DRZ400. While it is a fantastic bike, I think it's no secret that with a few modern touches, this bike really could be the unicorn for a lot of people. I get comments on it almost daily. It's solid. When is Suzuki just going to put 6 speeds and EFI on the DRZ400? When are they going to do it? And how would they go about it? Let's start off with the positives and give the DRZ its flowers. I am a previous owner of a DRZ400. I copped a lot of crap for pointing out some of its negatives, but contrary to common belief, I actually really love the DRZ and fully understand why so many people love the bike. It is great value for money. It is dead reliable, so easy to work on. It makes decent power. It was also reasonably light as well. That is a very rare combination in this current market, let alone 20 years ago. But 20 years ago is still a long time. It came out in the year 2000. Metallica was suing Napster, NSYNC had a #1, and we were all worried that the Y2K bug was going to end the world. That's how long ago the DRZ came out. So let's get into how to bring the DRZ into the 21st century. Start it up. In my mind, there's 4 simple things that need to be addressed about the DRZ to put it back on the top of the pyramid of ultimate dual sports. That 5-speed gearbox, put it in a cannon, aim it at the sun, shoot it off and never talk about it again. I do not want to see a 5-speed gearbox on a new DRZ400 from Suzuki. It's not a bad gearbox, it's reliable, decent enough, but you're just working with one hand tied behind your back when you compare it to a modern 6-speed gearbox like the KTM 690, CRF300L, KLX 300, etc, etc. You're never going to get as good a spread with a 5-speed gearbox. In this modern era, we're having to ride further and further out of the city to get to the off-road areas, which means more time sitting at high speeds on highways to get to the dirt. So that 6-speed is really going to be necessary for most people to want to jump into a new DRZ. The other one is EFI. I don't think the DRZ needs EFI just because. The carburetor I had on the DRZ, the pumper carb, was fantastic, and in fact in some ways better than EFI because you don't have that herky-jerky response that you get out of all modern motorcycles as they try and pass the EPA and Euro standards for emissions. No problems like that with a carburetor because that kind of stuff just wasn't required back then. So it's very smooth down low. Absolutely loved it. But if it's going to get onto the market, it needs to have EFI, otherwise it has no chance of being able to pass those emission standards. And it's not one I'd be disappointed to see either, as I've never had a bike with EFI fail. I think it's super reliable, so I don't see it as a potential problem. The third one on the list isn't a non-negotiable like the others. This one can stay the same if Suzuki need to do so to save money, but I would like to see an upgrade in the suspension. While the suspension is what I would term competent enough for a beginner trail rider, maybe even an intermediate trail rider that doesn't really do any technical terrain, then the suspension is generally okay. But as you know, if you've owned a DRZ and you tend to do more of the technical stuff, big whoops, you like to go a little bit faster, or you're loading the bike up with luggage and your regular bloke-sized corpse and heading off for a camping trip, you can start to tax the suspensions. I'm sure they've got better RMZ forks lying in a bin somewhere in the Suzuki factory that they can just pump out and bolt onto this bike without adding on extra costs. I don't really care how they do it. I would just like to see better suspension being put on the DRZ, as when they bolted on the current suspension onto the DRZ, it wasn't really state of the art back then either, so it really is quite long in the tooth. But as I said, you can still get the job done with the current suspensions. I understand if Suzuki want to save heaps of money and just stick with it, but I would love to see an upgrade here. Number 4 on the list is also not a non-negotiable. I think they could get away with leaving this, but I would like to see an aesthetic upgrade, particularly the dash. Give that a refresh, more information for the modern rider. Definitely upgrade that headlight. I swear holding a candle at night will illuminate the road better than the DRZ headlight. It is just atrocious. As for the aesthetics, I'm on the fence here. They could go old school and keep the retro look that the DRZ now has because it's been out so long. I would be perfectly fine with that. I liked my Cape York edition with that black and yellow color scheme with a bit of blue on the stickers. But on the other side, I would also like to see it freshened up, make it look a bit more modern and competitive on the market. That certainly is an opportunity they have. And it's amazing how easy these upgrades roll off the tongue, and it all seems so simple and so logical. But it certainly isn't an easy feat, especially to implement that 6-speed gearbox and EFI on the current DRZ. It requires major movings and shakings by Suzuki. So let's get into what's held Suzuki back. Basically, it's costs, EPA regulations, and a risk-averse philosophy that all the big Japanese companies now hold. Those are the basic fundamental reasons. Now, there's two tiers here to the cost structure. There is, of course, the cost of getting the bike, the concept from someone's brain onto the showroom floor. That is a very costly venture with materials, R&D and development, as well as marketing, all the things that go into getting that bike to the finished product. And the cost of EFI and 6 speeds might not seem like a lot to you, but to bolt a 6-speed to a motor that's developed for 5 speeds really is quite a lot of engineering and changing a lot of the internals of the engine. So it's an expensive task, and the EFI is a real difficult one, because if they go down the route of just bolting EFI onto the current 400 motor, doesn't necessarily guarantee that it will pass emission standards. Suzuki might know that and realize they have to develop a whole new motor, and developing a reliable, light enough engine that makes decent power and has long service intervals and passes our really strict emission standards these days is no easy task. So again, of that cost being a real roadblock in the Suzuki getting an update. So that brings us to the second tier of this, the current economic climate. In difficult financial times, companies want to trim the books, make sure they're running lean, there's no extra costs, and not spending money on anything they don't have to. So a small market dual sport like the DRZ that isn't giving them a large profit margin because it's a value orientated motorcycle isn't high on their to-do list of refreshing new motorcycles. Regulations, and specifically EPA regulations, have also held Suzuki back. It's why Kawasaki also pulled the KLR off the showroom floor for a little while to update it and give it EFI and get it past EPA regulations. Because like Kawasaki, if Suzuki do change the DRZ400 in any significant or meaningful way, it means that the grandfather laws that it currently operates in a lot of countries like here in Australia, where it gets past a lot of the regulations because it's been out so long, and those regulations that are new aren't retroactive, so they don't apply to the DRZ. But as soon as Suzuki changed something on that bike, suddenly all these new safety and EPA regulations apply to the DRZ. If they were going to make changes, they really have to be quite significant. The third real hurdle to the DRZ400 update is risk-taking measures by large companies. Companies will have a rise in the market. We saw this with Japan as they quite quickly got better and better than their rivals in the UK, like the BSAs, the Triumphs, and the Nordens of the world. Suddenly the Japanese were on the market with more power, lower prices, and more reliability. And that was basically the status quo for many, many years. And Japan was rewarded for taking risks and giving us interesting and new motorcycles that push the edges of development and performance. But as happens with a lot of companies, they start making a lot of money, they get bigger and bigger, the decision-making process has to go through more and more people, and the core group that got all those amazing ideas through suddenly have to battle with the finance department, with the investors, and it becomes a very slow and ossified process. And this is what has happened, in my opinion, to a lot of these Japanese companies. They become risk averse and more about protecting their profit margins and ensuring that their investors have a decent profit margin at the end of the year, rather than giving their customers what they want, which is pushing the boundaries of what can be done with a motorcycle and offering us the best value and performance they can. So those are some fairly negative reasons as to why we haven't seen the DRZ, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we won't see something amazing. We've seen some pretty fantastic dual sports lately, the CRF300L and Rally, the KLX300, KTM 690, which they keep chugging out and updating. And of course, there was a big surprise of the CRF450L from Honda a few years ago. There's been worse situations for a bike to be released. Look at the WR250R. Yamaha put far too much money into that bike. It was well built, expensive, expensive components for a dual sport and it cost quite a lot compared to the competition, but people flocked to the damn thing because it was such a great little dual sport, and it was released smack bang in the middle of the global financial crisis. It wasn't the best time to be taking risks on a small little dual sport that the market thought nobody would want. That just shows you that sometimes companies will realize that there is a market for the bikes. I think it is only a matter of time before Suzuki do look in the direction of their dual sports once their hand is finally forced by these regulations forcing them to update the bike. So I hold out hope that we will see a 6-speed EFI DRZ with all the features that we love out of the current model on the market one day soon. I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you think the upgrades I've suggested are a good idea? Do you think there's some other things that I've missed that should be on this bike? Or do you think we'll never see the DRZ400 again? Let me know your thoughts down below. As always, don't forget to stay shiny side up, and I'll see you in the next one.